Okay, year 11. So welcome to our final revision session for GCSE English Language Paper 1. We are looking at Paper 1, obviously, as I've just said, to make sure that you feel equipped and ready for the exam that you are about to sit. So remember, it is a 1 hour and 45-minute examination, and it'll start tomorrow morning. And within that time, you need to complete 2 sections, Section A and Section B. I'm just going to let these individuals in. So back to what I was saying. This is a 1 hour and 45-minute paper. And within that time, you're expected to spend 1 hour on section A and 45 minutes on section B. Now, within that 1 hour for section A, you will also be expected to you've also got your reading time built into that. And so 15 minutes of that 1 hour is reading time. That means you've got 15 minutes to read and you've got 45 minutes to answer the question. Now, it may not take you the full 15 minutes to read, and so any time that you're able to save in the reading section will be really helpful, as it will allow you to use that time for the other questions. So let's think about this paper in itself. We have sorry, I don't know what my screen is doing. There we go. So you've got the 1 hour and 45 minutes. So 15 minutes for reading, 45 minutes on the questions. Obviously, we've got question 1, question 2, question 3, and question 4. Question 1, you're probably looking at 5 minutes. Question 2, you've got 10 to 12 minutes. Question 3, 10 minutes. And then question 4, approximately 25 minutes. Now, you may find that you have a few additional minutes in which to spend on question 2 or question 4, and that will be because you may not take the entire time for reading. What you don't want to do, however, is spend longer than an hour on that section, because that's going to eat into your time for paper 2, which is the writing section. Now, you only have 45 minutes worth of writing time within this examination, so you need to make sure that you use that time wisely as well. So for section B, you want to spend approximately 10 minutes planning, 30 minutes writing, and then finally 5 minutes checking your answers. And the other thing, and I will say this again when we look more closely at section B, ideally you want to be writing 1.5 to 2 pages with a maximum of 3 pages. Generally, students who write more than 3 pages write themselves out of additional marks, and that's obviously something that I really want you to avoid. I want to make sure that we are maximising the marks and the grades that you're able to achieve, so that we can really make sure that you secure the grades that you want. So my intention tonight is to be finished by about 8:30, so that you've got time to do any last minute revision that you feel you want to brush up on after this session, but also to give you time to eat your dinner and have a good night's sleep. Remember, a good night's sleep and a proper meal is going to help you feel really prepared for this exam. So let's move on. So I'll start by looking at paper 1, section A, and we'll work through those questions, and then we'll move on to look at paper 1, section B. Paper 2 will obviously be the first Wednesday back after half term. So I'm just going to let in these last few individuals. And then I will stop admitting. Excuse me, guys. Okay, so let's have a look. Just let this one last person in. Oh, okay, so let's have a look then. Hopefully you've all got your copy of this in front of you. This is what I'm going to be referring to throughout the session. So hopefully you will have that in front of you, and that will allow you to be able to follow along and do the work with me. So if we open up to the first page, on the inside page, you will have this copy of the text. So I want to firstly start by saying you ultimately want to make sure that you read the extract very carefully, but you also want to make sure that you read this piece of information at the top. The reason why this is important is it contextualizes the entire story. It makes it very clear to us what the story is going to be about. So in this instance, it tells us the main character in this short story is a boy. Though we don't get to know his name or age, at this midpoint in the story, he is playing amongst some rubble on the site of a demolished building. Everything seems normal to begin with, however. So that tells us that something surprising is likely to happen within the video. So one evening, the boy was crouched on top of the mound, making a new town out of a heap of broken glass. He liked this time of day best, after tea, before bed. The air seemed to get grainy as its colours changed from vinegary yellow to candy floss blue. He could rub it between his fingers like dust and slow time down. At the top of the mound, he was in charge, and he didn't want to go home to bed. He collected green glass shards and broken down bottlenecks. He tumbled fragments of old window in his hands like shattered marbles. He pushed the glass to the mound, making houses, balancing roofs on them, building towers. The last of the sunlight caught and glinted in the tiny glass walls. More of the blackbirds than he'd ever seen before rushed overhead and gathered on the lamp post. The orange light hadn't yet switched on, but the shadows were growing. He heard 9 chimes of the town hall clock. For a moment, the lamp post looked like a tall, thin man wearing a large black hat. When the man turned towards him, he looked like a lamp post. The man had a greyish-green speckled coat with rust and a black hat that quivered, with beaks and feathers. The man didn't need to climb the mound. He was face to face with the boy, with his feet still planted in the pavement. "What are you making?" asked the man. The boy didn't answer. Every child is always making something. Shake them out and they're full of dust and dreams. The boy stood up, ready to run, but then he remembered that at the top of the mound he was king. He dug his heels into the rubble. "I'm making a new town, better than this one. The sun can shine in through the walls. The buildings look grander. It'll be a great glass city." "All it needs is people," said the man. "Yes, it needs people," said the boy. And when he looked down, tiny creatures were scuttling beneath the glass roofs. They looked like ants or spiders, but the sky was darkening and the creatures were moving too fast to be sure. He looked to the man, but there was only the lamp post, and as its orange light snapped on, the birds launched into the sky. Where were the sounds of cars or footballs being kicked against walls? There were no shouts from parents calling everyone in. "Mum!" He pushed open their front door. Their house was in darkness, but the telly was switched on. His mum wasn't in any of the rooms. A half-drunk cup of tea had been left on the arm of the settee. The boy thundered back along the silent streets. He stood in the orange light beneath the lamp-post. "Give them back!" he shouted. Nothing happened, although he could hear the rustle of feathers coming from the darkness above the light. The boy ran to the top of the mound. "Give them back!" "But I haven't got them." The man's face glowed. "You have." In the gloom, it was hard to make out the tiny creatures beneath the glass roofs. They were no longer moving. The boy couldn't be sure what was a particle of rubble and what was a person sleeping in their broken glass. How do I get them back? He asked, but the man was a lamppost again. So when you first read through the text, use this time to absorb what's happening and to make sure that you've understood it. Now, it should only take you maybe 5 minutes to read it through once. You then need to make sure that you're also spending some time just looking at this text as a whole to support you with the question 3. So what I would suggest is to do a very quick second read through if you haven't done it on your first read through, and just to make some annotations that are going to help you when it comes to to question 3. So here, for example, I might just write established setting. And by jotting down established setting, that's going to help me when I need to specifically find parts of the text that I want to write about when it comes to question 3. I might also just jot a note down here that says house building, as that is very much what the young boy is doing. Now, the boy doesn't have a name, so that might be important to me later on during question 3. We then have a change of focus in this second paragraph. And in this change of focus, we've got the intro of a man who may or may not be the lamppost. So I've just jotted that down as well. Then we've got some dialogue, some conversation. So I'm just going to jot that down again to act as a signpost for me for later on when I'm looking at question 3. Then I've got this bit here. Where were the sounds of cars? So not only have I got a shift of focus, but I've also got a shift of atmosphere. Now that's definitely going to be something I would want to talk about when it came to question 3. I'm just going to pause for 1 minute. I can see some people's hands up, so I just want to check that all is okay. Hold on. Farhan, you had your hand up. Is everything okay? Isa, you've got your hand up. Is everything okay?
Miss, I can't see your screen.
You can't see my screen. Okay, hold on. Let me just reshare it. And then you can tell me if it's there. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, thanks, Miss.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, apologies then if you haven't been able to see my screen. I'm sorry about that. So just to recap, as I've read through this extract, I've jotted down here that in this opening paragraph, he's establishing the setting, he's got the house building, we've got a change of focus with the introduction of another character, we've got some dialogue being used, and we've got some atmosphere. Now, this change of atmosphere is going to be important to us, okay? That change of atmosphere is definitely going to be something we want to write about in question 3. We then have maybe perhaps a sense of panic being created again because he cannot find his mother. He doesn't really know what's going on. So that very quick read through, and it's taken us about 7.5 minutes to read it through once and then to go through it again and add some annotations. That's going to be invaluable for us when we get to question 3. Now, it's my intention to go through each question and remind you of what you need to do to maximise the marks that you're going to get. So if you turn it over your page, you should have a copy of the paper. And again, it tells you here, answer all questions in this section. You're advised to spend about 45 minutes on this section. So if you think about the timing that we spoke about previously, that's going to make sure that you're maximising the time that you've got. Now, question 1 is meant to be the most straightforward question. And what we're aiming for here is a high success rate. That means that we're getting 4 out of 4 with relative ease. So the first thing I need to draw your attention to is it's going to say, read again the first part of the source. That's lines 1 to 7. What that means is that you can only use information from lines 1 to 7 to answer this question. If you do anything from line 8, 9, 10, even if you're accurate, you're not going to get marks for it. It then asks you to list 4 things from this part of the source about the boy. 2 things to point out here. Firstly, it wants you to list 4 different things, okay? So you need to make sure that the 4 pieces of information that you list are different. Secondly, it wants you to ensure that the information you're listing is about the boy. Now, an easy way to make sure that you're going to hit that criteria is simply to start each of your sentences with the noun phrase. So in this instance, we might write the boy. And then the key thing is that we pick out information from lines 1 to 7 that's going to help us answer that specifically. So we look again at line 1 to 7. One evening, the boy was crouched on top of the mound, making a new town out of a heap of broken glass. So here I can see that it's crouched on top of the mound, that he's making a new town out of broken glass. It then says he liked this time of day best. So I've got 3 things highlighted that I could be writing about now. The air seemed to get grainy as its colour changed from vinegary yellow to candy floss blue. He could rub it between his fingers like dust and slow down time. At the top of the mound, he was in charge. That's another piece of information I could include. And he didn't want to go home to bed. That's another piece of information I could go. He collected green glass shards. That's something. Broken bound bottlenecks. He tumbled fragments of old windows in his hands. He pushed the glass into the mound, making houses, balancing roofs, building towers. So instantly we can see that for question 1, we have a large amount of information that we could use. And our job is simply to take 4 of those pieces and turn them into sentences. So for example, the boy was crouched on top of the mound. So that would be an example of one sentence. My then next one might be the boy collected green glass pieces. Okay. Now, I'm not going to go through and do all 4 of those. You've seen the sort of information that you could collect. But the answer for this question is always going to be surface level. So it's going to be the very obvious elements for you that you're being asked to look at. Okay, so you spend about 5 minutes on that question. Certainly you shouldn't spend any longer than that. And then we get to question 2. Question 2, again, is going to focus on a very specific part of the text. And this part of the text is going to be lines 5 to 15. Now, lines 5 to 15 mean that you cannot write about something outside of those lines for this question. Now, the exam board have made it easier for you because in your exam paper, they've printed out that part of the source. So providing you're writing about what's inside this box, you can't really go wrong for this question. Now, you're going to have about 10 to 12 minutes on this question, okay? And if you've got a little bit of extra time from when you were doing the previous question, you may find that you have some more time to play with this, okay? But regardless, the first couple of minutes for this question should be spent reading the extract and annotating it. But before you do that, you want to make sure that you understand the question. So how does the writer use language? So we're not talking about structure, just language. How does the writer use language here to describe the boy playing in the evening? So again, we have a focus on the boy, except this time our focus is on the boy playing. It tells us that we could include the writer's choice of words and phrases. We definitely want to do that. That we could include the language features and techniques being used. And it also says sentence forms. Don't worry about sentence forms. You can still get the full 8 marks through not ever mentioning a sentence form. The key thing to this is what we're doing with the language. So we need to be specific about the language that we talk about. We need to have quotations. But more than that, we need to analyze the effect. And I cannot stress enough how important that analysis truly is, okay? Being able to say what impact something's having is really important when it comes to this question. So let's look at the extract. He tumbled fragments of old window in his hands like shattered marbles. He pushed the glass into the ground, making houses, balancing roofs on them, building towers. Now, it tells me here that I'm being asked how language is being used to describe the boy playing in the evening. And the first thing I notice here is the use of verbs, making houses, balancing roofs, building towers. Okay. And one thing that we can do here to make sure we maximize our success is we can look for patterns. So here we've got a list of verbs. Okay. And we could say that they're dynamic verbs because they suggest an action that's ongoing, that he's doing something over and over again. Now, the other thing that I notice here with this use of verb is that each one of these is him creating something. So this idea that he's creating also suggests that he has an element of power in his game. Now, that's going to help me when thinking about this bit here about how the boy is playing, because he's got this power. The last of the sunlight caught and glinted in the tiny glass walls. More of the blackbirds than he'd ever seen before rushed overhead and gathered on a lamppost. The orange light hadn't switched on, but the shadows were growing. He heard 9 chimes of the town hall clock. For a moment, the lamppost looked like a tall, thin man wearing a large black hat. Now, this bit here, to me, is almost like a blurring of reality and the game. So what we're unsure of here is whether or not the man or the lamppost is the real bit. So that would definitely be something that would be worth pointing out. The man had a greyish-green speckled hat with rust and a black hat that quivered with beaks and feathers. The man didn't need to climb the mound. He was face to face with the boy, with his feet still planted on the pavement. Now, this was actually quite a difficult exam paper when it was put out, because on first glance, it looks like there isn't a huge amount to write about. But if you're talking in great detail about the language being used and the way that it creates images, then it's going to help you. Because the other thing here is it says that he tumbled fragments of old window. So again, we've got this real sense of power from him. He's very much in charge of action. We've also got sibilants here, shattered marbles, pushed and glass. And this sibilance creates echoes of broken glass. And again, that tells us that he is using his creativity and his imagination to turn something broken and damaged into something wonderful. So we've spent maybe 3-4 minutes tops reading through and making some analysis, and I've got 3 different things I'd be able to write about. That means you've got about 8 minutes to write 2 to 3 what, how, why paragraphs. And we really want to make sure that the what, how, why paragraphs that we're writing are powerful and going to support our analysis. So there are some questions that I want you to ask yourself when you are doing this writing. So the first one might be, what does the writer want us to know. And in this instance, it is about the boy and his game. And then our sort of secondary what question is, what does the writer want us to feel? So what emotion is the writer trying to evoke for us when it comes to the boy? The next questions that we're asking ourselves are linked to the how. Now, how questions are always about the evidence. So how does the writer use language? And remember, I want you to be as specific as possible. Don't tell me the writer uses language. Tell me that the writer uses verbs. The writer uses dynamic verbs, as specific as you can. And then your why questions is, why does the writer use these words? Okay, or why does the writer make this choice? Now, if we keep those questions in mind when we're writing our answer, we're going to be able to have a much stronger, a much more detailed piece of writing. And obviously, that's what we want to go for. So I'm going to do a little bit of modelling just to show you how you might structure one of these paragraphs. And then one thing that you could do after this session is perhaps write another paragraph or practice this skill so that you've had another opportunity to revise. So we want to make sure that we are presenting ourselves as really mature, sophisticated writers. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start by using the writer's surname. Now, the writer's surname will usually be printed on the front of the insert booklet. It's not printed on yours because we didn't print that page in an effort to save trees. So my question, what does the writer want us to know about the boy in his game? What does the writer want us to feel? Well, I know that the writer wants me to think that the boy is really creative, and she wants me to really understand that he's in charge. So I'm going to say Dean uses a list of dynamic verbs to present the boy as creative, industrious, and in charge of the game and his environment. Now, that would be the first section. That would be my what, okay? So what does the writer want us to know about the boy in the game? What does the writer want us to feel? So Dean uses a list of dynamic verbs to present the boy as creative, industrious, and in charge of the game and his environment. I've definitely answered this what does the writer want us to know bit. What does the writer want us to feel? That might come in more use in a moment. So now I need to use some quotations. So my quotations I'm going to lift. Now, I've talked here about it being a list of dynamic verbs. So that's the section that I want to be quoting. So I'm going to say, sheet there with it. He was, and remember, quotes need to go in quote marks. He was making houses, balancing roofs, and building towers. Now, I've just cut out the part of that quotation that I didn't need so that I can be succinct and make it very clear. So I've now done my what and my how. So Dean uses a list of dynamic verbs to present the boy as creative, industrious, and in charge of the game and his environment. He was making houses, balancing roofs, and building towers. Now, the why is the big bit, okay? The why is where I need to very, very clearly explain why the writer has chosen those words. So I'm going to say these dynamic verbs are all related to creating something out of nothing. Okay, now I could leave it there, but that's not going to get me very far in my analysis. I need to be able to say more. So these dynamic verbs are all related to creating something out of nothing. This clearly presents the boy as being powerful in his environment and very much in charge. And I could keep adding to this. So I've got Dean uses a list of dynamic verbs to present the boy as creative, industrious, and in charge of the game and his environment. He was making houses, balancing roofs, and building towers. These dynamic verbs are related to creating something out of nothing. This clearly presents the boy as being powerful in his environment and very much in charge. Additionally, each noun that follows the verb is a bigger or more complex structure, which conveys the idea that the boy is resourceful and creative in his game. So that's just one short example of what you could write about a small extract. So Dean uses a list of dynamic verbs to present the boy as creative, industrious, and in charge of the game and his environment. This is like the what section, and it's almost like I'm making an inference. I've looked at the information, and from that I can infer that he's being presented in this way. I've then given the quotation. Now, if I just did these two things, I'm going to find myself getting a level 2 mark because I haven't explored the significance of the key words. But here, when I say these dynamic verbs are all related to creating something, I'm moving up out of nothing. This clearly presents the boy as being powerful in his environment. This would be counting as a perceptive idea and very much in charge, kind of doubling down on that perception now. Additionally, each noun that follows the verb is a bigger or more complex structure, which conveys the idea that the boy is resourceful and creative in his game. So I've made my inference. I've made my point, or my what, which is an inference in some ways. I've got my quotation, and then I've expanded upon it. Then I've analysed it. Then I've delved deep into the language. And that's absolutely what you need to be doing for this question, okay? For the language analysis question, it's all about picking out the key quotations and then really zooming in on it. Now, ideally, in the time that you've got, you'd want to be writing 2 to 3 of this type of paragraph, okay? But the thing that I must really stress to you with this question is you must analyze the language. So why is the writer using that? What impact does it have? Okay. I've just going to take a question from one of you just to make sure all is okay. Mataza, you've got your hand up. Are you okay? I'm going to take that as a mistake then. No worries. So back to question 3 then. So question 3, as you know, is the structure question. And when we've done our initial reading and we've made some notes, that's going to help us with our structure. Okay, that's going to help us with the quotations that we're going to be selecting. And again, it's really important that we make sure that we're being very, very clear with that. Sorry, I've just accidentally closed the window down. There it is. Okay. So we're going to be very clear about structure. Now, I don't want you to spend longer than 10 minutes on this question. Okay. And it's going to be tempting sometimes to spend longer than 10 minutes on it, but it's worth 8 marks. You are more likely to get the full 8 marks on the previous question with less effort. Okay, so we really don't want to spend more than 10 minutes on this question. So the first thing to point out is it says here, you now need to think about the whole of the source. And this doesn't mean that you have to write about the whole of the source. It simply means that the information that you take from the source can be taken from anywhere in the source. Okay, so it doesn't mean you have to talk about the beginning, the middle, and the end. It means that you could talk about the beginning, middle, and end. It also means you could make 3 points about the beginning, 2 points about the beginning, and 1 point about the end. Okay, it does not mean that you have to just write about every single thing. You're then going to get this line here. This text is from the middle of a short story. Now, this is important in terms of it helps you understand where it fits in relation to a wider novel. So what you might think about is, why is the writer introducing this idea at this moment in time? And then we've got this bit, and this bit is always going to be the same. How has the writer structured the text to interest you as a reader? And then, just like in question 2, we've got some things we could write about. And remember, it says that you could, not that you must or you have to, but you could. And I want you to really think about the fact that ideally you need to have 3 things you're going to write about. So we're looking for 3 structural features. Now, their suggestion is that you write about what the writer focuses your attention on at the beginning, how and why the writer changes this focus as the source develops, and then any other structural feature that interests you as a reader. Now, that other structural feature could be a change of tone, and we know that that happens in this extract. It could be the use of dialogue. It could be the use of foreshadowing. It could be the introduction of another character. It could be about the way that the writer chooses to end their story. Any of these could be a relevant structural point to talk about. Doesn't mean you have to talk about all of them. You're going to talk about 3 of them. Now, for this question, you really don't have huge amounts of time. So you will have read the text a couple of times, and you will have obviously looked at that question 2 in more detail. And what you want to make sure is that you know very clearly what you're going to write about. So if we go back to the extract that we looked at, here down the side, I know that they established the setting, that we've got that focus on the house building, then we've got this introduction of another character in the dialogue, then we've got the change of atmosphere, then we've got that sense of panic, and then it ends with the man being a lamppost again. So I could say that that was sort of anti-climactic, okay? But it also reverts this idea of the game. So if we're looking at this question, again, we're still thinking about using what, how, and why. Now, I know that different revision guides might talk about different things. They might talk about Peter, pretzel, pizza, petal, petals. There's loads of them, okay? The exam board have said that what, how, why is a really good basis because it gives you almost like a mental checklist of things to include without it stifling your creativity or your understanding. So what you're thinking about here is, what am I being asked to focus on? So what's the writer holding your attention on? How is this focus created? And then why is this interesting to the reader? And again, just like with the language analysis question, if you keep these three questions in your head, it's going to help you form a much better, a much more solid response, okay? And ultimately, that's what we're aiming for. Really concise, really solid, really clear ideas. Now, the other thing that I will say is that if you are able to, at the beginning of this question, offer a very brief overview of how the writer is using structure, that can also be something really powerful. So, for example, and I was saying this to my group earlier today, what the writer focuses your attention on at the beginning, you could also, at this point, compare it to the end. And if you're automatically comparing the beginning of the story to the end of the story, you're already showing a wide awareness of what the writer's looking at. Of what the writer's doing structurally and how that's important. So let's go with that same what, how, why format from earlier. We're going to start by thinking about what the writer does overall. So what structural features. So if I started by saying overall, Dean uses a third person narrative to create a chilling tone, which intrigues the reader. Now, if that was the only thing I wrote for this question, I would probably still get 2 marks. I'd get a mark for recognizing the idea that it's a third person narrative, and I'd get a mark for saying that it creates a chilling tone which intrigues the audience. But I want to go further than that, okay? So I want to think more specifically. But this very quick overview is a good way of banking a couple of marks immediately. So I want to sort of think, what else is the writer doing to create this sense of intrigue? So I might start by saying at the start of the text, I want to think very carefully about what I'm going to say. And really, what I'm being focused on is the boy. So at the start of the text, Dean focuses the reader's attention on a young boy who is building a town. And then we're going to put in our quotation, so our how. Building a town out of a heap of broken glass. Now, what I want to be thinking about is, why is the writer drawing my attention to this at this stage. So overall, Dean uses a third-person narrative to create a chilling tone which intrigues the reader. At the start of the text, Dean focuses the reader's attention on a young boy who's building a town out of a heap of broken glass. We want to say now, you know, why is this interesting to us? Why is this important? So we might say, this conveys to the reader that the boy is resourceful and alone. It may evoke a sense of empathy as the boy does not seem to have friends or toys to play with. So again, what we're doing is we're offering that analysis based on the information in front of us. Now, the next thing I'd want to do would be to go on and link this to the next section. So I might follow this up by saying, Dean then abruptly switches our attention to, and again, at this point, we can use the quotation from it, the lamppost looked like a man, to the lamppost. Look like a tall man. And now I need to explain why that switch of focus would be interesting to the reader. So here, for the why, I've got this conveys to the reader the boy is resourceful and alone, may evoke a sense of empathy as the boy does not seem to have friends or toys. Abruptly switches our attention to the lamppost look like a tall man. This blurs the lines between reality and his game, which may foreshadow the sinister events that unfold. So see how we're kind of building up these ideas. So far, I've actually mentioned 3 different structural things that the writer's done. I've talked about the third person narrative, albeit briefly. I've talked about the switch of focus, and then I've also talked about that element of foreshadowing. Sorry, I thought I saw someone's hand up. No, okay, we're all good. So we've got that sense of foreshadowing as well. So those would be 3 structural devices that I've commented on. Now, if you've done that in less than 10 minutes, there's nothing stopping you adding in an additional structural device. But you don't have to, okay? The 10 minutes that you spend on this question, if you produce something like this, that's easily going to get you 6 marks, okay? 6 out of 8, which is a really solid response for question 3. So I want to move on to question 4 now, which is one of the higher tariff questions. Remember, question 4 is worth as many marks as question 1, 2, and 3 altogether. So that means we want to be spending more time on this. So far, we've spent 10 minutes on question 3, 12 minutes on question 2, and 3 to 5 minutes. It means that we should have probably about 25 minutes, maybe a couple of minutes more, maybe a couple of minutes less, but we should have approximately 25 minutes on this question. Now, this question, again, is going to ask you to refer to a very specific part of the text. So here it says this part of the answer on line 16 to the end. Now, again, it's really important that you only focus on that section, because if you write about something outside of those lines, you're not going to get a mark for it. What I would suggest is that you take the text, you draw a line there, and then you explain this part here. This is the bit that you're going to focus on. So you either draw a box around that or scribble out that top bit, okay? You want to make sure that you fully understand what you are exploring and what you're writing about in this section. So do that, and then you're not going to end up writing about the wrong section. Then let's look at the question. So it says here, focus this part of your answer on the second part of the source from line 16 to the end. A reviewer wrote, this end part of the extract where the boy's game comes to life takes a darker and more chilling tone. To what extent do you agree? In your response, you could. And again, it gives us some things you could include. Consider your own impressions of the boy's game. Evaluate how the writer creates a dark and chilling tone, and support your reference with quotations. Now, there are a couple of things that I want to make really clear to you, because there have been some misconceptions being shared on TikTok and some other social media platforms. You do not have to write that you partially agree and partially disagree. You can completely agree and still get full marks on this question. You can completely disagree and still get full marks on this question. You do not have to say, on one hand, I agree, and on the other hand, I disagree. That is not necessary, okay? That's the first thing that I want to make really clear to you, okay? The second thing I want to make really clear to you is that you're not going to get high marks if you don't do this middle point. Evaluate how the writer creates it. And this how is asking you to write about methods. And those methods can be language and they can be structure, okay? It can be a combination of the two. So to be really clear, when answering this question, you can completely agree, you can completely disagree, you can partially agree, but you do not have to partially agree, okay? What will get you far is the analysis and the evaluation that you offer. So look again at the statement. The first thing you're kind of asking yourself is this a good statement? Do I agree with it? So a reviewer wrote, this end part of the extract where the boy's game comes to life takes a darker and more chilling tone. This is the part that I've got to decide if I agree with. Is it darker? Is it more chilling? Does that happen in lines 16 to the end? So this time, when I'm looking at it, I'm just going to be highlighting anything that I think creates a dark and chilling tone. And I'm going to be looking very carefully at the way that the writer is doing that. Specifically, I'm looking at the methods that are being used by the writer. Is this writer using methods that are going to be accessible for me to write about? Don't ever write about something that you don't fully understand, okay? Just make the best choices. So, is this more chilling? What are you making? Asked the man. The boy didn't answer. Every child is always making something. Shake them out and they're full of dust and dreams. The boy stood up, ready to run. That bit there, ready to run, to me, that starts to suggest that there's something perhaps a little bit creepy or sinister. But then he remembered that at the top of the mount, he was king. He dug his heels into the rubble. I'm making a new town, better than this one. The sun can shine in through the walls. The buildings look grander. It'll be a great glass city. So here, this use of the phrase great glass city, well, that shows me that the boy feels very proud of what he's creating. So at this moment in time, maybe I'm not sure if I think that this is a sinister one. All it needs is people, said the man. Yeah, it needs people, said the boy. And when he looked down, tiny creatures were scuttling beneath the glass roofs. That to me is a bit sinister and creepy. It's a bit chilling. They look like ants or spiders. these are things that people are quite often afraid of. So that's creating sinister. Then there's pathetic fallacy. The sky was darkening and the creatures were moving too fast to be sure. He looked to the man, but there was only the lamp post. And the light snapped on, the birds launched into the sky. So now, actually, I'm building up more evidence here, aren't I? Tiny creatures. That's a little bit sinister, okay? These kinds of creatures are chilling. They kind of give you goosebumps. Here, darkening. We've obviously got connotations of evil and sinisterness with that. The birds launched into the sky. That might suggest that something has spooked the birds and made them want to fly. Then we've got some rhetorical questions being used. Where were the sounds of cars, of footballs being kicked against the walls? Okay, so these rhetorical questions are being used to create an idea of uncertainty. And so this idea of uncertainty, again, is going to help us to really start to develop this idea that it's quite a chilling tone. We then have this bit when he runs home and we hear again, the house was in darkness. That repetition of darkness is something we can talk about. We've then got things like a half-drunk cup of tea had been left on the arm of the settee. So this tells us that it's something unusual, okay? That element of unusualness creates, again, that sense of anxiety. And that sense of anxiety is then transferred to the boy who thundered along the silent streets. Okay, so we can see this element of anxiety. Now, obviously, you would want to go through and add in and look for other evidence or other elements that you would want to be writing about. I'm very conscious that we've only got about 30 minutes left and I want to finish talking about this question before doing a very quick look at section B. So I'm only going to look at this amount and I'm just going to talk quickly again about how we structure this response. Now, this is the essay that is probably the most like the essays that you would have written for literature. You're being asked to write an evaluative statement, okay? And so you're going to have an essay plan for this where you have a thesis, which in this term is like a mini answer to the question. Then you're going to have 3 key ideas and you're going to structure those around quotations. And each of those are likely to be a what, how, why paragraph. And then finally, you have a teeny tiny little conclusion, which links back to your answer, where you explain how the text has created that impression for you. Remember, the extract says that we might want to talk about the impressions the boys gain, how the writer creates a dark and chilling tone, and support reference the text. So again, what we want to be thinking in this is what method does the writer use to create a dark and chilling tone? How does this method appear? Why has the writer chosen this word? Why has the writer chosen that? So it's all about those little questions again. So if we were thinking about this in terms of writing our thesis statement, we want to be as clear as we possibly can, unlike my visualizer right now. There we go. Okay, so we're going to start by saying I wholeheartedly agree. Now remember, we can completely agree, we can completely disagree, we can partially agree, but we don't have to balance it. So I wholeheartedly agree with the reviewer, because that's what it says in this extract. This final section of the story takes a far darker turn when he cannot find his mother, and it certainly has a chilling tone. So that is essentially the thesis statement, the mini answer to the question. Now, if this, for some unknown reason, if that was the only thing I wrote for this question in the exam, I'm still going to be able to pick up 3, 4 marks, okay? Now, I don't think that's all that we should be doing, but if we did, we've safeguarded some marks for ourselves. Instead, again, we want to think very carefully about our what, how, why. So what is the writer doing to create a chilling and sinister tone or a darker tone? How does the writer do this? And then why have they made that choice? So I might start by saying, and I'll do it in the different colours again so we can see each section. I might start by saying, Dean successfully. And if I use adverbs like successfully, clearly, cleverly, I'm offering a valuation as I go. So it's just going to make my writing appear more evaluative. That's going to help me. So Dean successfully creates a chilling tone when the atmosphere in the extract changes dramatically. And then I'm going to use my quotation, sky was darkening. So Dean successfully creates a chilling tone when the atmosphere in the extract changes dramatically. Sky was darkening. I'm going to say here, the use of pathetic fallacy, because I still want to get in that subject terminology. Here, the use of pathetic fallacy highlights to the reader that something bad may be about to happen. This is further emphasized. This is further emphasized by the verb darkening, which clearly has sinister connotations. Now, really, I want to build this idea up further. I want to keep layering this answer up. So we can keep returning to the what, how, and the why to do this. So I could also say, additionally, the fact that and then I'm going to use another quotation and see how I'm using the embedded quotations to make sure that I'm getting to the heart of it. Additionally, the fact that the birds launched into the sky suggests that they have been spooked. Now, it's not enough to just leave it at that. I still have language within this quotation that I want to look at. And here, that most obvious word to me would be launched. So I might say the dynamic verb launched has undertones of desperate and fast action, which suggests the birds, well, it suggests the birds were keen to escape the danger. Okay, so by doing that, you can see that I'm layering up and I'm increasing the level of analysis. Now you've got a good 20-25 minutes on this question, so you should be able to easily do this and a couple of paragraphs where you're looking at more than one idea at a time. So let's look at this again. Dean successfully creates a chilling tone when the atmosphere in the extract changes dramatically. Sky was darkening. Here, the use of pathetic fallacy highlights the reader that something bad may be about to happen. This is further emphasised by the verb darkening, which clearly has sinister connotations. Additionally, the fact that the birds launched into the sky suggests that they've been spooked. The dynamic verb launched has undertones of desperate and fast action, which suggests the birds were keen to escape the danger. Now, at this point, I think, oh, I don't know if I've gone back to my question enough. So I'm then going to say, back to the danger, this clearly establishes a chilling tone. Okay, and so by just referring back to the question with this idea of a chilling tone, it's going to make sure that we're hitting that mark. It's going to make sure that we're coming back to the question, and it's going to make sure that we're hitting the question, okay? It's going to make sure that the examiner knows that I've not forgotten or got lost in what I'm writing about, okay? So if when you're reading through you think, actually, I've not addressed the question enough, there is time to do that. Okay, so that's section A. That's the first 4 questions. So that quickly gives me just enough time to talk about question 5 or section B with you. Now, by the time you get to this, you should spend about 45 minutes on this section, okay? And it's really important that you remember that those 45 minutes are for you to plan it, write it, and check your answer. So you want to spend 10 minutes on planning, 30 minutes writing, 5 minutes checking. When you are checking, there are 3 things to really look out for. Firstly, have you organised your work into paragraphs? If you've not used paragraphs, simply place those 2 lines where there should be a paragraph and the examiner will mark it like it is paragraphed. Secondly, check your punctuation. Have you used those 2 things correctly? Have you got a full stop and a comma correct? If you've got people talking to each other, have you used speech marks correctly? Now, obviously, there's a whole range of punctuation to use, and Miss Murray's made some short videos on these 3 pieces of punctuation in particular, so you can always check those out after here. The next thing to remember is that you must write in full sentences. So make sure that you're not writing any incomplete clauses. They then tell you that you're reminded of the need to plan your answer. And that's because well-planned responses do better. All you need to write is 1.5 pages, 2 pages, 3 pages maximum. And then again, they remind you to leave time to check. Now, you're always going to have a choice of 2 tasks. It may be, as it was here, a choice of 2 stories. Write a story set on a dark night, as suggested by this picture. Write a story about a game that goes badly wrong. Often you get a choice of 2, so it might have said something like write a description about a dark night, as suggested by this picture. If you're asked to write a description, remember a description doesn't have a plot. A description is about painting an image with the words. Okay, so it's about putting that picture in your reader's mind. The idea being that your examiner could shut their eyes and imagine this place that you're describing. A story needs a plot, okay? And key things to remember here, keep it simple. So if you're writing a story, what you want to think about is what's going to happen. Now, we could either do write a story or write about a game that goes badly wrong. So let's assume that I'm going to take that idea. Key things to remember. Firstly, my story should take place in a period of time that is between 15 minutes and 1 hour in length. I should try to have no more than 2 characters, okay? I don't need to change location dramatically. I don't need to introduce helicopters. I need to think very carefully about what I can achieve. In 45 minutes, you are not going to be able to write a Hollywood blockbuster movie. Instead, you're writing about a very short, concise moment in time. The next thing I would say is you don't waste your time. If you're being asked to write a story about a game that goes badly wrong, start at the moment that it goes wrong or at the moment just before it goes wrong. You don't need to start 3 days before with the characters getting up and having breakfast and having an argument, okay? So that's why planning is really important. So I want to remind you of the format that your teachers will have been showing you throughout all of your prep time. That's your drop, shift, zoom in, zoom out, and leave. Now, each of these could be a paragraph. Each of these could be 2 or more paragraphs. Think about this more as being a section, but what you want to avoid is you want to make sure that you are not having any really extended and elongated responses that make it really difficult, okay? So you want to be very careful about that, okay? You want to make sure that you're creating it. So if I was going to do this story, write about a game that goes badly wrong, I'm going to drop my readers right in to the middle of the action. So I'm going to do this minutes before the game goes wrong. Now, it doesn't really matter what that game is. Could be hide and seek. That's not important. What's important is how you set it up and you create this real sense of tension, this real sense of danger and dramatic urgency. Okay, so minutes before the game goes wrong, I'm going to start in media res, which means in the middle of the action. Think about that poem bayonet charge. Suddenly he awoke and was running. That's starting in the middle of the action. Think about any war films that you've ever watched where people are fast paced and moving. Think about Romeo and Juliet when it starts with that fight, or the witches, introducing Macbeth. All of these things have dramatic action points, and that's what we want to look at. We're then going to shift. Now, that shift could be a shift in time, could be a shift in topic, could be a shift in place, or a shift in person. Some of you might like to use foreshadowing at this moment in time, and that's fine. For me, I would want to shift to a specific character. Okay, and with that character, I think I might talk about the game going wrong. So I want to show their worry, the sense of panic, perhaps even create a sense of fear. Then I need to zoom in on something. Now, for me, that zoom can be a person, again, a place, a thing. And what I'm thinking about here is that I would want to make a zoom on another character or my other character. And this time I'm going to be thinking about their internal thoughts. Maybe at this point I'd include something like the way that their eyes are trained on some information or something like that. The zoom out is returning to the big picture. Okay, so this would be, imagine you kind of like zoomed in, and then you're zooming out. So minutes before the game goes wrong, then I look at the fear and panic in a character, then I zoom in on this other character, and then I zoom out. I return to the big picture. Is there going to be an opportunity for safety? Is this person going to be able to be rescued, for example? And then leave? Well, in this instance, I might leave it on a cliffhanger. Will my person be safe? Now, this type of planning is far more effective than doing a mind map or coming up with a list of complicated vocabulary that you hope you're going to be able to squeeze in, okay? You want to think really, really carefully about how you're going to create this image, okay? So I'm thinking about minutes before this game goes wrong. So I'm thinking that these kids are going to be in some sort of abandoned warehouse playing some sort of game of hide and seek. And I'm feeling that my idea is that one of them is going to fall through the floorboards and hurt themselves. So in terms of starting in media res, I want to put myself with that character. So I want to start now. I want to not start with something like I want to be interesting in what I'm writing. Narratives can be written in the first person, the third person, or even the second person, which would be you. It's all about using the one that works best for you. And certainly when we get off here this evening, a good piece of revision might be to have a go at writing one of these stories just for a bit of practice. So I'm going to go for Emily cautiously crawled along the dusty floorboards in the old house. Okay, now that's not the most imaginative opening. Certainly I think I probably could have gone for something a bit better. So this is one of the things that we're talking about when it comes to consciously crafting. It's okay to take a couple of minutes to improve what you're writing as you go, for there to be some redrafting. It's absolutely okay to I think you've just lost my visualizer again. It's absolutely okay to look at how you can make something better. So here we've got Emily cautiously crawled. So let's add some more detail here, okay? So let's put instead Emily crawled cautiously. So I'm going to use an embedded quote, embedded thingy here, embedded clause, placing one hand in front of the other as she moved along the dusty and grimy floorboards of 10 Kensington Place. Now, again, I've not done anything really remarkable here, but we can see that through a little bit of crafting, I've been able to create something better. I've been able to create something a little bit more rewarding in terms of content. So Emily crawled cautiously, placing one hand in front of the other as she moved along the dusty and grimy floorboards of 10 Kensington Place. This is allowing me now to imagine that I'm following this person. Now I want to add a bit more detail. How does she know where she's going? So I'm going to say the light from her phone barely illuminated the heavy air that hung about her. She didn't even want to think about the dozens of spiders in the rafters. All she cared about was beating Adele at this stupid game. So now you can see that my narrative is starting to take shape, okay? And I've got that conscious crafting in here. Now, if I'm looking at this in terms of an examiner, you know, there's things here that are good. So we've got a capital letter there. We've got an embedded clause. She moved at the dusty and grimy floorboards of 10 Kensington Place. So we've got a nice, engaging opening. The light from her phone barely illuminated the heavy air that hung about her. Got a bit of personification there. She didn't even want to think about the dozens of spiders in the rafters. And here, actually, I could have used a dash to join these ideas together. All she cared about was beating Adele at this stupid game. So far, I've stuck very clearly to the brief, and I've done some conscious crafting, and I've got a range of vocab there. All of this should allow me to do well in this section of the exam. Couple of warnings about this section. Again, there has been some bad advice floating around on social media that may suggest that you can take a story in your brain into this exam with you and simply write it out. That's not the case. If, for example, you've planned a story about kids playing on a beach or a description of a beach, and this is your image, that description is not going to match either one of these prompts. And since last year, if you produce something that does not match one of the prompts, you will be marked down, you will be penalised. So don't risk it. What you can do is think about creating characters and think about how these characters are going to behave. So this character of mine, Adele, is the character that I've been creating. She's quite cruel, she's unkind. It seems right that she's going to be the person who puts her friend in danger, because that's the type of character that I've been creating all year with my year 11s as we've been doing our writing. So guys, hopefully that's been a really useful walkthrough of all 5 questions for you. Do make sure that you spend a little bit of time perhaps completing 1 or 2 of these questions, having a look at things that confuse you. There are individual videos on YouTube for every single one of these questions that have been recorded over the past couple of years. Do have a look at them, make use of GCSE Pod. But I really can't stress this enough. Make sure you get a really decent night's sleep, okay? Being well rested is going to be incredibly important for you when it comes to sitting this exam tomorrow. So I wish you all the very best of luck for tomorrow, guys. I hope this has been useful. And next week, it's half term. Hooray. The week after that, I'll be doing a session on paper 2 as well. So good night, guys. Go home, get rested, practice, and make sure you get a good night's sleep. Okay, thank you very much, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.